to be together. It was something he was looking forward to, and so it wasn't enough.
But he went to a party.
We went to a club meeting.
Well, it was a party. It was a motorcycle club meeting, but it was a party, and they drank a few beers, not very many, according to what one of his friends there told us, and we knew several of the guys that were in the club with him from for years.
Since they were little guys.
Since they were little kids, they did things with both of our boys, and the one of them told him at the party that he'd been having an affair with his girlfriend. So he came home and just drunk enough that they're arguing over it, and he ended up going in and getting the gun out of the gun safe and told her I ought to just shoot myself. Well, she called me and said Wayne's threatening to commit suicide. So I said, well, give me the phone, and I talked to him for 5-10 minutes. I'm not sure how long it was. I talked to him, and the last thing he said to me was, well, Dad, I guess in the morning I got to get some help. And I don't know whether he was trying to be sarcastic or whether he actually meant it, but the last thing he said to me was, in the morning I guess I got to get some help. And I said, I guess if you think it's time, that's what we got to do. I told him I'd be over in a few minutes. I got out of bed, it was like 2 in the morning. Something like that.
It was past, we were in bed.
1, 2 in the morning.
We're old people, we were in bed.
And all I did was slip my pajama bottoms off, slip my pants on and some shoes off, got in the truck and drove across town. And as I pulled into Pioneer Park, the police car was just about a block ahead of me, and my stomach just fell. I had premonition, I guess. So I pulled up in front. I know all the policemen. And so the policeman came over to me and he said, you don't want to go in there. I said, is he gone? And he said, yes, he's gone. So as the story comes out, he had the gun.
It was in a locked box, so he purposely went and got it.
He got it out, was threatening to shoot himself. And she decided to wrestle it away from him, wrestle the gun away from him. And she said he jerked the gun back from her, and when he jerked it back, whether he meant to shoot himself, nobody knows but him, right? He jerked the gun from her and took a step back, and as he jerked it away from her and took a step back, boom, he shot himself in the head with a .22 caliber pistol.
And we're lucky because most times 22s are not that lethal. I mean, I realize we know that they can kill you. So on one hand, we're lucky that he's not a vegetable. Because, you know, they don't make a big hole, they don't. And I want everybody to know it wasn't the gun's fault. He did it to himself. The gun didn't jump off the table and shoot him. He did it.
We felt lucky that he wasn't one of the guys that decides to shoot her, and
and everybody else.
Her boy was there, her youngest boy was there, his boy was there. He didn't have any intention of harming anyone else.
Yeah.
And so that's the one thing that we can be thankful of, is that he wasn't a person that was going to take everybody with him. And again, did he mean to shoot himself? I don't know. Was it an accident? I don't know. He had the gun, he was threatening it. It ended up happening.
When in coroner's reports they write down what happened, how did they describe this death?
Is
pretty
it
much just like we just
Did
told
they say,
you.
did they say death by suicide or death
Yeah.
by accident?
Death
by suicide?
Thank you for telling me that. So, how, to switch gears a little bit, how would you say this has impacted your life and your family since then? So, like, what year was this?
13.
Okay, so since then, like, what is it, how has it affected you guys?
With me, I've hidden all these years because I always felt ashamed. I mean, I grew up here. I've helped lots of young people in my life. I had a restaurant that I employed most of the kids that nobody else would employ, that were felons or drug addicts, and I seemed to help the majority of them to get their life straight. So for me, I felt ashamed that I couldn't even help my own son. But I could help all these other kids, but I couldn't help my son. And and that's pretty common. I know that is. Because, you're too close to the situation. You can't see the whole thing. So, I have watched football games for my grandchildren from the car. I have let my husband go shopping. I've hid because I felt ashamed. I know it's not my fault. I did the best I could. I was a young parent. I was only 18 when I became Lane's mom. I didn't know how to deal with the abandonment issue. I mean, now looking back that I'm smarter, I can see all them things. But I didn't know what to do with them back then. I did the best I could.
Are you talking about, like, his bipolar disorder? Or
the
whatever?
whole thing. I mean, I didn't know what to do. I mean, I just loved him and tried to fix things as I knew how they did. So for the last close to 5 years, I've pretty much hidden, except for where I felt comfortable with my children, with my family. I wouldn't go out in public much because even if they're not, you feel like they're whispering. Our son killed herself. What did she do wrong? I know I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't do it. But I am his mom. I should have known. I should have stopped it. I should have fixed it. But I couldn't. So my life has pretty much just been in this house. Because I was ashamed to leave it.
And then their girlfriends each wore one. And my mom wore a t-shirt that said, "I love my superheroes," and it had a whole bunch of superheroes on it. We did this big photo shoot for like 2 hours. It was so much fun. And throughout all this, Josh was dealing with the VA and trying to get in to see a psychologist because he knew he was not okay. Like he knew he was drinking way too much. He knew he and his girlfriend were getting high way too often. Like he knew he needed help. And the VA, because it was just a regular discharge, not dishonorable, he still had VA, like, medical and stuff like that. And they kept dragging their feet. And he finally got in to see someone up at Southwest Counseling. This was 2 days before he died. He went to Southwest Counseling, and he afterwards stopped by my parents' house and told my mom, like, this was amazing, like, I got everything out. I told her things I've never told anyone. Like, he seemed so hopeful, like, he seemed excited about life. And then 2 nights later, the night of August 13th, it was a Tuesday in 2013. Same thing. The phone rings late at night, and it's his girlfriend. And she's like, "Danny, I don't know where he is. Like, we got into a big fight. He's really drunk. We left the bar. I don't know where he is, and my Jeep is dead." Like, her vehicle was dead. It was at her parents' house. So he had taken his Jeep and just taken off. She's like, "I think I know where he is. I think he's where we take our dogs to go run. But take me there, like, I want to go find him. So I went and told my mom, because she hadn't gone to sleep yet. My youngest brother was downstairs with his girlfriend. My dad was in Fort Collins visiting his sister after doing a training thing down in Denver with the police. And I went and told my mom, I said, Josh is missing. Like, we don't know where he is. Mariah and he got into a fight. Josh is toasted. Like, something's wrong. And so I went downstairs and got my youngest brother's attention. And initially I was going to go with my mom to find Josh. Because sometimes when he would get really pissed off, he would just drive off and need, like, a little bit of space. Like, my whole family is like that. Sometimes we just need to be left alone, no one bothering us. But we were worried. It was the middle of the night. And my mom and brother and I talked about it, and my brother said, I'll go with Mom, because I know exactly where they run the dogs. You go be with Mariah. Like, you go be with her. It's like, okay, fine. So I drove over to their house. This was the first time I had seen where my brother had moved to. I went over there, and then I kept calling my mom, trying to get updates. Called the hospital to see if someone with his name had checked in, because in my head, like, he'd already tried this twice before. Like, your mind goes to that with someone who has a history of suicide attempts. No answer, no nothing. 2:30 in the morning, Mariah's falling asleep. And I was like, okay, you go to bed. I'm going to go home. I will call you if I hear anything. I'll come over if I need to. Like, I'm sure he's fine. A little relationship, too. So I left, but I didn't go straight home. I drove up to the hospital, went into the ER. I said, you know, has Joshua Thompson checked in? And they said, no, we have no one here by that name. And I kept driving, and I was like, wait, I know where they turn off to drop off the dogs to go run. And so I get on the belt loop and start going up the hill, and I see lights and a shit ton of cars. And I see, Dale Mahanovich, county coroner, does not drive like a hearse or like a weird van. He has like a Cadillac Escalade, a big one. And I see that over there. So logically, I know, like, my brother's gone. But, like, you tell yourself, no, everything's fine, everything's fine. So I pull up, and I get out of the car, and I see my mom and my brother, and it was so, like, stereotypical CSI. They get out of the back of a police car. They're wearing, like, the police jackets. And I'm like, what's going on? Where's Josh? And two of the cops that I've known for years come up, and they're like, no, stay right there. Just stop. And my mom comes over, and she's like, you could just see it on her face. She's like, I'm sorry, like, he's gone. I mean, the problem, I think, with suicide, here at least, think about it, someone dies from cancer, you blame the cancer. Someone dies in a car accident, you blame the accident, you know, someone that hit them. Someone dies by suicide, I mean, that was, like, who do you blame? You always want to find someone or something to blame when there's a death. And out here, like, I looked at Sweetwater now. There was a suicide already in this last week. I mean, it's every week you're seeing an obituary, and none of them say cause of death. But almost every time I see an obituary for someone under the age of, like, 55, my first thought is, it's probably suicide. And it's rampant. It is all over the place. Just since my brother died, I think 2 more of his battle buddies that he was in Iraq with died by suicide. Another one of his childhood friends died by suicide in front of his wife. Like, it's everywhere here. And you don't really find it in any other state.
Do you have theories about that?
And people want to put it down to, I mean, it's Wyoming, there's nothing to do. And I think the isolation is part of it, but I also think the culture of cowboy up, man up, don't talk about it, doesn't do any good.
So try to imagine, like, the next 3 or 4 or 5 years of your life. How do you see his suicide, like, affecting you then? You know what I mean, the future, like.
Mm-hmm. Well, and for the most part, it's when someone older dies, you miss what they did have, mm-hmm. right? You miss, like, I remember my grandmother teaching me how to, like, sew a washcloth into a Barbie dress. Like, I miss those times. I miss her teaching me how to cook. My brother, I miss the fact that, one, like, he knew my boyfriend. They were really good friends when he died. We actually started dating a month after my brother died. But my brother will not be at our wedding. He will not ever get to see his nieces or nephews. Like, my future kids are not going to really know who Uncle Josh is, you know what I mean? When my parents die, it's going to be my baby brother and myself having to deal with that. Not the three of us, not the core 3 kids. It's going to be the 2 bookends. Like, it feels like, it's not that you move on, it's that you move forward, but you move forward with, like, little holes here and there.
Mhm.
There's certain things that
my choice to drink. But usually, because vodka was cheap, I would drink. At that point, I was drinking half a gallon of vodka a day. And that's all I would do, is sit there and drink and sit there and mope. Well, pretty soon, with no money coming in, I was being evicted from my house. It probably sounds like a country and western song, but you know, my family disowned me because of my choices, because of me not wanting to help myself, basically, and wallowing in my own sorrow. The more I drank, the more I hated people. The more I hated people, the more I drank. It was a vicious cycle. I would spend all, when I would get my check from Workman's Comp, I would go down and buy at least 30 bottles of liquor and try to space those out throughout the month, because I'd only get paid once a month. And by the end of the second week, I was out of liquor and out of money. Now I'd go in, I found myself going into liquor stores and shoplifting liquor. So anyhow, I was getting evicted, and I didn't have anywhere to go. Me and my dog, and that was happening that morning. That morning I woke up. I opened up my medicine cabinet, and I just happened to see a whole bottle of pills that I don't even remember what they were, Josh. And I thought, you know what? I am going to hotline, anything like that, because I was always too drunk. I didn't have a cell phone because I couldn't keep anything. I couldn't pay for anything. If it was, if you believe in fate, if you believe in a higher power, God, Buddha, whatever you might want to call it, somebody intervened that morning. Because although me and my sister had been fighting, I hadn't talked to her in 2 or 3 months. And it was early in the morning, Josh. It was like 6:45. I always left my door open the front door open, so my dog could come in and out. He was a big guy, you know. And my sister happened to stop by on our way to work that morning to talk to me and see me laying I was on the front room floor, unconscious, obviously, and she called the ambulance. The next thing I knew, I woke up. I was in the hospital, and I was mad, Josh. I was madder than hell that I woke up. You think a guy would be grateful for something like that, but I was mad. How dare her intervene? How dare her show up to my house? There's a police department. You know? I know there's people out there that care. Because like I said earlier, it's a temporary solution it's a permanent solution for a temporary problem, and I believe that. Because I was just lucky, I was one of the lucky ones to wake up from it. And I was mad, and I don't know why. Because, well, I do know why at the time, because I knew that I had to face all this shit, you know, but here I am. I hope that helped you, Josh.
Can I ask you a couple more questions?
You bet.
Okay, how would you describe the mental health facilities in Southwest Wyoming, Rock Springs?
The only one that I'm familiar with is Southwest, and I love that place. I really do. A lot of people, a lot of addicts, lead them in the right direction to the mental health part of it, to the professionals that know what they're doing. But I would definitely intervene until that happened.
Okay. How do you see the next 3, 4, 5 years with you dealing with this and everything?
I don't future trip. You know, I wake up, I try to get through that day. I can't future trip. I learned
Well, John Hiltner, but everybody calls me Johnny. I wouldn't even answer to John, honestly, if somebody called me that, yelling John Hall or something like that, but I guess that don't matter. Born and raised here in Rock Springs. My dad was a coal miner at a Black Butte, where I actually just got a job at, which is weird. Mm-hmm. My mom was a librarian up here, which is funny. That's kind of how I got to that job. It's like, well, my mom used to be a librarian up here. So, I mean, I was... And like I had a really good childhood, like, you know, whatever I wanted, pretty much. I was spoiled, I would almost say. It was, and I got into, like, you know, smoking marijuana and stuff like that. I think that's kind of where my life kind of took kind of a shitty turn. I wouldn't say. I mean, I experienced a lot, but I just lost. Like, I never really gained like a real focus in life because I was focused on, like, partying and smoking weed, and I started drinking young, like, really early too, like probably about 13, 14, so a bit earlier than me, and I got in, like, trouble for skipping school when I was in 11th grade, so I got suspended for, like, 30 days at the end of the year, and it was, like, there's no way I was going to be able to graduate on time because of that, so I knew that I was going to end up having to go to an extra semester after my senior year, even if I did good in senior year. So I remember going to, like, the first couple days of school in my senior year, and I didn't want to do it. So I'd rather be out there, like, partying with my friends. So I pretty much just dropped out. I actually came up here and ended up taking, like, my practice GED test, and then, like, a week later getting my GED. Mm-hmm. I was always kind of just like, you know, I always used that. It was like, oh, I got my GED, and, like, you know, a year before I would have even been graduated. So what does it matter? And in all honesty, it didn't really matter because I wasn't planning on going to college back then. So I just dropped out and I started working full time, partying full time. That was still my main focus. It's pretty much working just so I could have money to party. I wasn't thinking about my future. But I was still doing pretty good when I was younger, like 18, 19. I had saved up a lot of money. Even though I wasn't making that much, but I didn't have no bills. I'd rather be out there, like, partying with my friends, so I pretty much just dropped out. I actually came up here and ended up taking, like, my practice GED test, and then, like, a week later getting my GED. Mm-hmm. I was always kind of just like, I always used that as like, oh, I got my GED, and like, a year before I would have even been graduated, so what's it matter? And in all honesty, it didn't really matter because I wasn't planning on going to college back then, so. So I just dropped out and I started working full time, partying full time. That was still my main focus. It's pretty much working just so I could have money to party. I wasn't thinking about my future. Graduated, so what's it matter? And in all honesty, it didn't really matter because I wasn't planning on going to college back then, so. So I just dropped out and I started working full time, partying full time. That was still my main focus. It's pretty much working just so I could have money to party. I wasn't thinking about my future. But I was still doing pretty good when I was younger, like 18, 19. I had saved up a lot of money. Even though I wasn't making that much, but I didn't have no bills. I was still living with my parents and stuff, but it's just the choices I started making. I actually started getting like DUIs and stuff like that. And so, I mean, I was getting myself into it so. I ended up saving up like $8,000 cash right before I think it was like November the year before. I can't even remember what year it was. I'm good with dates, but me and my buddy decided to move down to like Lake Havasu, Arizona, and it was supposed to be, I don't know what it was a sabbatical for myself, and I didn't even deserve one when I was young. So we just moved down there, and I started drinking down there a lot, like because I was still a pretty big pothead at that time. But when I moved down there, we didn't have no weed with me, so it was hard to find weed down there. And I didn't even really want to, so I ended up just not working for like 6 months straight because I had all that money and we saved up and rented the place out for everything. And I just hung out in the sun and on the beach and shit and drank all day, every day for pretty much 6 months straight. So, yeah, I moved back here when I was 21, went back to construction, started drywalling, which I did for a long time. It was good money, my drywall boss was, as long as we were willing to work hard, he paid us good, but it's just that drinking atmosphere that Rock Springs is. It's just how it is around this town. Like either you move away or you become ingrained in this culture, which is alcohol induced big time. I mean, everybody I knew, my dad was like that, he worked hard, he'd play hard, he'd drink, go to the bar. So that's how it was. Me and all my friends, I mean, we all worked on like the same drywall crew. Me and a lot of my real close friends. So we'd go to the bar for lunch. We'd go to the bar after work. I mean, that's where we got paid on Fridays, was the bar. So drinking has always been a long time. And somewhere along the lines, I don't know, I can't say like a day when all like the fun times that I was having switched to like. I started actually thinking about things like what I had done, where I got myself. But at that point, honestly, I was like, I couldn't see a way out of it. I just wasn't sure what to do with my life. I wasn't it seemed like I'd already squandered any opportunity I had. Because I had so many opportunities to get jobs, dealing with it. I just had this huge all or nothing thing going on with me, and it was actually the first time I attempted suicide. I just went and got a big bottle of alcohol, went home and ended up cutting my wrist. It wasn't a real crazy attempt like my next one, but it landed me in jail because I ended up having to call the cops or call the ambulance. I didn't really remember doing it because I got so drunk before it happened and everything like that it's kind of a blur. All I know is I woke up, I was in the hospital and they're I didn't want to admit it. I just decided, I fell into alcohol, drinking I've never before, ever. I always drank, but I always took days off and I never did what I was doing then. I was drinking constantly, pretty much all day, every day. I started drinking at work, which is something I'd never done before. So it was pretty bad. And I don't know, it was depression, it's huge. And I think after that first attempt at suicide, I was thinking this thing, when I was younger, there was never the option of committing suicide. There's just that, it wasn't there. I was adamant, actually, it was kind of a dickhead about it, you're weak if you do that. Which is why I'm sure a lot of people don't like to talk about it, because people do think that. But that is how I felt like that. But after that first attempt, then there was always this thing in the back of my head that said, well, you can always, there's always that option. It doesn't matter what happens in life. You can can always just kill yourself and everything will be gone. So it's not, and honestly, it's still there. I don't think that option will ever go away now that it's surgery and everything like that. So I'm like, fuck. So after about 3 months of sitting around just drinking, broken, then I was taking like pain meds too. But it's never been my issue. But then I decided, like I was running out of money. I still couldn't go get a job. Depression kicked in hardcore. But I just happened to be driving down the road one night, ran out of booze, going to get some booze. I think I was planning, like, I want to have one of my suicide things, but nothing happened that night because I ended up getting pulled over, getting a DUI, which is a second felony DUI, which is pretty bad. So I wake up in jail, broken, still got my heel broken. It was horrible. I was like highly suicidal in there. It was crazy. But they put me in like the medical section at the county jail. So I was with just this one other crazy bastard for like a week. It was kind of weird because when I was in there, that dude ended up trying to hang himself while I was in there. And I'm like thinking about it like that night, like how I could kill myself in county jail, which is pretty much impossible. This dude goes and like grips up his sheets and creates a rope and hangs himself. And I was going outside at lunch to get our lunch, and he didn't come out, and I really didn't know what I wanted to do. But I had a girlfriend at the time. She was actually really supportive, and she ended up talking me into going to treatment here back in Southwest. So I did, and although I still didn't like it that much, I took it more seriously. I was honest, talked about like my issues, like about my suicidal thoughts. When I was in jail, there's this guy, Ross. He came from Southwest Counseling. He came and talked to me a lot. He was a pretty cool dude. I was just thinking about him today. He was actually a pretty good guy. So just like having that talking and everything like that was pretty cool. And then going into treatment, then I just like had made up my mind that I wanted to do something. So went through treatment. I ended up getting, because I was still with my girlfriend, so I moved in with her when I got out of there. I was in there for like 2.5 months. But I mean, I was on drug court, because I'm still on probation and everything like that. I got like 6 years in prison hanging over my head if I mess up my probation right now, which is helping me out. But like I had all these things like planned, like how am I gonna, when you talk about it, like when you're in treatment, like what am I gonna, my goals and everything for life, how am I gonna, I don't want to just get out and stay sober, because I still don't think that's gonna help me. So I ended up coming up here, going to school, not for what I really wanted to, but it's to get a better job, pretty much out of the mines and stuff like that. So I mean, it wasn't the easiest. I'd relapsed twice while on drug court. Got caught both times, which is weird. But I don't know. Life is really good right now, and it's pretty much because I've taken all these steps, these goals, not drinking, getting my old job back. But I quit when I was drunk. They gave me my old job back. That was crazy. My boss was like, oh yeah, we'll give you another chance. It's like, if you would have just took the breathalyzer that day, we'd probably just sent you to treatment. It's like, well, it still might not have worked. I probably would end up drinking. Because knowing that I could go to prison for like 6 years is helping me out.
And we were already at 9-point-something%. So we're very close to that goal. Because one of the things we're discovering is suicide is the thing that people are afraid to talk about. They're afraid to mention. They're scared to say anything because what if I say the wrong thing? What if I say something and that's the thing that drives the person over the edge? Or how do you say, I hurt your, are you okay? Or you're not thinking of hurting yourself? How do you do it? And who do you refer to? So that particular
specific questions. I'd like to get an idea of what the conversation is like in the government when they're talking about this in legislative sessions. Like my real honest question, Brittany, is like how out of touch are they? Or
terribly.
Okay.
Terribly. horribly, horribly out of touch.
What is their perspective?
Their perspective is, it's so sad. It is so sad to me. Their perspective is almost like it doesn't really exist. And if we don't talk about it, it's not really happening. Their perspective is not unlike the perspective you saw with Medicaid expansion. If you recall, Wyoming is one of the few states who has yet to accept that voluntary expansion of Medicaid, which, and we could talk about that forever, and not just even in terms of the insurance it would provide people, but the amount of money it would bring to the state, how it would help our hospital system. I mean, I could go on and on and on. And for 5 years in a row, that was of all my years in the legislature, and I had a lot of really nice victories and some really, really good wins. My most spectacular defeat was for 5 years in a row. We tried desperately to get Medicaid expansion, and it never, ever happened. And I actually had someone, when I was speaking on the floor of the Senate and speaking of the importance of expanding Medicaid, I actually had a senator, a very bright senator, an attorney, a good person, somebody I liked, actually stand up and ask me on the floor, "Well, Senator Kraft, I don't know any poor people, do you?" And I'm like, "Yes, I do." It's the same attitude with suicide. "Well, I don't know anybody that does that." Well, aren't those all just kids that went out and got drunk, or people that have overdosed, or people, they have this odd concept of what it is. And I can guarantee you, if they're anything like the general population, and I know they are, there's not one of them sitting in those seats that hasn't been impacted in one way or another by a suicide. But it's almost like we don't really want to talk about it. And what you would hear in conversation, what you would hear people say is, "Well, that's for health. That's for the Department of Health. And we already give the Department of Health this big chunk of money, and they can figure it all out." And so when the money was removed, it was removed from suicide prevention. It was also removed from a fetal alcohol program on the reservation. It was removed from a couple of other social interest programs. There's a huge disconnect in the Wyoming legislature between what people need and what they're willing to do. They unfortunately view social services programs as providing handouts, or these people ought to just pull themselves up by their bootstraps and get going and take it from there. They don't. It's hard. It's hard for them to see the hurting citizen out there. It's really hard, and that was something I noticed and saddened me, especially on the Labor Health Committee, because I sat on the Labor Health Committee for many years. And people would come and talk about whether it be suicide prevention and awareness, whether it be substance abuse, whether it be Medicaid expansion. People would come and they would tell their story, because the only place in the legislature a citizen has to come and speak is to a committee. That's their only opportunity. And we would have a committee that was very open to people coming and talking, but not real open to hearing. And I remember one particular tough evening where we were hearing various stories, and this was about expansion of one of the family services programs, one of the TANF programs, temporary aid for needy families. And these stories were just heartbreaking. And the chairperson would listen to the story and say, "Thank you, next, thank you, next, thank you, next." And I'm sitting there tearing up. And of course, that's always bad form to cry at a legislative meeting. And I'm thinking, how can people not see? How can they not see that these are our citizens? But they don't. And they don't see the reality of $2 million is what we talked about for suicide. That would be like me asking you if I could have $20. It's nothing. And these are the same people who will tell you that we have no money, that the state is running out of money, we have to rely on our resources. God forbid we touch the rainy day fund, which was created for this exact environment that we're in now, which is where because Wyoming's been a boom and bust economy forever. It's heavily dependent on the extraction industry. It's heavily dependent on oil and gas. That's boom and bust. So a prior legislature very, very wisely created this quote, rainy day fund, which is actually a legislative special reserve, legislative stabilization reserve account, or the rainy day fund. That was created with the idea that when we hit some tough times, we could access that money. All that money is doing is continuing to grow exponentially. There's an amazing amount of money in there that we haven't accessed, because one of the things that legislature didn't do was put in a formula. Like when revenues drop below a certain percent can be activated. So trying to get any money out of that is like pulling teeth. So what you would hear at the legislature was, number one, we don't know any of those citizens anyway, so we're not really sure what you're talking about. Number two, it's really a problem for the Department of Health. And number three, we haven't got any money. And this would be really nice, and we would really love to help these programs. But we haven't got any money, and we're certainly not going to touch any of our reserves. And number four, they're always so busy looking for a misuse. Looking for, like, again, kind of using an example from the Medicaid expansion, another question I was asked was, are you sure that this is really going to be for some single mother with 3 kids and not for some ski bum living in his mother's basement? Mm-hmm. And the thing is, you know something? There might be a ski bum living in mom's basement who's accessing that. That's possible. And I guess I'm okay with that if it does help the single mother with the 3 kids. Mm-hmm. I guess I see that as sort of collateral damage, and that I am more than happy to take that risk. But they don't see it that way. They see it that we're providing handouts to these people. In addition to that mindset you just mentioned, we have that cowboy up mentality. We have that. In fact, I remember when I was first going into psychology and was first choosing a career as a therapist and as a counselor, I had an aunt. And this aunt, everybody should have an aunt like this, because in her eyes, I could do no wrong. I was the perfect child, and I say everybody should be blessed with that kind of an aunt. So here she is, her little darling Bernadette is going to go into psychology, and that was hard for my aunt. That was really hard, and because it was me, so it had to be okay. But I still remember her saying, well, we were always taught, you don't air your dirty linen. And that's the attitude. You don't air it. You don't talk about it. You don't, it's not cool. It's not what we are. We tough it up, and we cowboy up, and we do all of these things. And who's dead? Would you rather? And so that's kind of the number one thing we have to do, I think, is erase that stigma that we don't talk about it. We have to talk about it, and we have to be able to provide those resources. And we have to, Cassie Crumpton always reels off these numbers, and she says, put them in your phone. Put them in your contacts, so that when somebody says, well, I don't know who to talk to, you can say, here, call this one, call this line, here, text this line. So that you don't have to feel inadequate. You don't have to feel like, well, you can't talk to me, I'm not a therapist. Well, but I can get you to somebody. I think that's real important. And
Well, we could start out just introduce yourself and say what you do and why you got involved in all this thing.
Okay, my name is, awkward, start again.
Yep.
My name is Cassandra Crumpton. Currently I am the Sweetwater County Treatment Court Coordinator, It is a specialized court program for people with substance misuse disorders. We try to get them in a pro-social, supportive court environment and get them sober and returned back to the community to be productive citizens. Before that, I worked for the Prevention Management Organization of Wyoming. I am a certified community prevention specialist, and I was able to do that with PMO, that's what we call the agency. And whenever I worked with them, I worked in suicide prevention, substance misuse prevention, alcohol abuse prevention, and tobacco cessation. Prior to that, I was a probation and parole agent for the state of Wyoming. So that's kind of my full history.
Yeah, so what got you from the, from the probation work into the prevention work,
It's all connected. With working in the criminal justice field, you kind of find people at their lowest low. Usually people that enter the system at that point have really long-term existing battles that they've been fighting. I didn't last too long in that field. It kind of was too much for my heart every day. It was difficult seeing people struggle as much as they were and not being able to help them in the way that I wanted to in that system. And so I had to step away. But from that I found and was able to work for PMO on the prevention side. So kind of whenever people get into a situation where they're on supervision, they already have the problems going. Prevention was compelling to me because you can get ahead of the issues before they develop, especially whenever you see methamphetamine abuse does to a family or undiagnosed mental health disorders and how that contributes to substance misuse and things like that. They all just fall in the same pot and boil up together. So I feel really lucky to have learned as much about prevention and what people can do to change the environment to prevent people from having to live that hard life.
So talk about that, like changing the environment.
It's a hard thing to do because people don't like change. And in a state with a culture like Wyoming where we pride ourselves on the Old West and that kind of true grit mentality, sometimes it's really hard to get people to see the benefit of making small changes that can really have an impact on people's lives. Things like policy changes on a state level, an increase of taxes on alcohol. Wyoming hasn't increased alcohol taxes since like 1933. Funding from an alcohol tax increase could pay for prevention, which would lower the rates of substance alcohol abuse and what we spend on treatment and incarceration and family services and all those things.
So that stuff way outweighs the cost of prevention.
Completely. The state easily, the last number that I was aware of that I can get you more accurate, something like $800 million annually for alcohol misuse. That's what the state spends. Whenever you can get a little bit of money and get ahead of the problem and implement things like a reduction of hours of sales or better policies to ID people to make sure they're of age whenever they're consuming in a public space. Things like that get ahead of access and overuse can really save money in the long run.
So do you think that alcohol plays like a major role in suicide? Talk about that.
Completely. Alcohol is a huge, alcohol misuse, I would say, is a huge contributing factor to increased chances of a suicide crisis. We know that alcohol is a system depressant. People, whenever they're struggling with something internally, tend to reach for the bottle because it's a way to numb out the feelings or a distraction from whatever battle they're fighting internally. And whenever you drink, you don't have the ability to make clear decisions. I mean, that's a proven fact. Your brain on a cognitive level isn't functioning like it does whenever there's no alcohol present, and people are more likely to make a decision that can have an impact long term whenever they're under the influence of alcohol. You're more likely to take a risky chance whenever you're consuming alcohol than not.
In your experience, what amount of percentage or whatever people do you feel like had alcohol, like substance abuse problems with associated with their
The
suicide?
state has the numbers, and I don't I don't remember offhand what they were, but something like, I want to say it was around 60%.
So it's significant.
It was very significant.
And is that when people are, people know that they drink a lot, or is this also like in toxicity reports, like in the coroner's office?
It's more coroner
Okay.
reporting that they get those numbers from. It's,
Wow.
taken at the time of death,
Mhm.
Autopsy reports, or self-reporting from family members if it was a situation, or law enforcement reports as well.
So, what other changes in the environment would you suggest aside from alcohol?
One of the biggest things in Wyoming specifically that I would like to address is the culture of the rite of passage, that alcohol consumption as a youth is a rite of passage. That one is very prevalent in communities across the state. It's normal to go out on a back road or have a bonfire or go out in the sand dunes and have a little party, and or it's safe if the kids drink at my house, then I know they're safe. That's a huge
So
thing.
Wyoming just has this really comfortable relationship with alcohol.
Completely.
I wonder if you or I or somebody will do some research into comparatively to other states. If that's a reason.
It would be a contributing factor for sure. I know the Wyoming Statistic and Analysis Center, WYSAC, has a lot of great reports and research available that has these connecting pieces to it that I can make available to you.
Cool. What's that? What was that?
WYSAC is the acronym, WYSAC.
Okay.
And they have great information on prevention efforts and the changes that it's made when it was in place, and historically the impact of prevention across the state. And they do cultural data collection like that too, with the prevention needs analysis with the youth in the high schools. They say, what's the likelihood of this? What would your parents see? How many times have you been to an event in the last month where adults were visibly intoxicated? All kinds of great information like that.
Okay. All right. Can you tell me about some cases, that have stuck with you, over the years or anything?
Wyoming specific or?
Please, if you could.
Okay. Without giving any identifying things for.
Check this.
Check it, yeah.
Yeah, we're good.
Identifying without giving any identifying information.
Yep.
I don't know if anyone stands out more than the other in that way because so many follow a similar thread. A common thing that we hear is an individual broke up with their significant other and started drinking and just kind of began that decline in crisis and ultimately ended up dying by suicide. Many times a situational thing will occur to kind of send someone down that path and we lose them to something like that. Alcohol is frequently involved. Another interesting thing with alcohol around the state of Wyoming, and not just alcohol, but any sort of lethal means, is that people will try to protect their families or loved ones that they'll leave behind and use means like a single car crash or going out into our open lands and just kind of getting lost and dying from exposure, but it was an intentional death.
Wow.
There's a lot of really gray area like that. Within the last year, I know of an individual in this area that had some struggles, had a period of recovery from alcohol. They had received treatment, a long period of recovery, began drinking again, tried to walk home in the winter, and died. Just drank to excess, and that was intentional, and the death was intentional.
Yeah, one of the things that I learned from the Wyoming Symposium was that there's this common idea that suicide is this kind of like instantaneous thing. You decide to do it and it happens, but sometimes with especially with drinking, like especially in the native communities, they'll drink themselves to death intentionally over years.
It's
so a
almost
different
like
way to think about suicide.
It's almost like a self-punishment. And I don't know if that's the best word I want to use, but people that fight this mental health and substance abuse or misuse battle carry this weight that people don't always see. And it's not a weight that is culturally appropriate to display. It's very internal, it's very private. A lot of cultures, especially like a native culture, you don't share it, you don't ask for help, you know what I mean? You carry it on your own too. It really, it just shatters people's lives completely.
How would you describe the current state of like the mental health, suicide prevention situation in Wyoming?
Wholly inadequate, completely inadequate. But I wouldn't say that's just Wyoming. There is a need for more mental health resources and substance misuse resources nationwide. But in Wyoming specifically, our low populated state with long distances in between makes it really difficult for people to get access to resources when they actually need them. Some places may only have one provider in their community that has a sliding scale fee system, and that may be the only place they can afford to attend. They may not have private insurance, or even if you have private insurance, the ability to extend beyond, you know, the 8 sessions you may get as a part of your employment assistance program. And the level of professionals, you know, we don't have many psychiatrists in the state, and some people with really heavy underlying mental health disorders need a high level of provider to be able to maintain whatever they're, you know, trying to find a balance with. It's a combination of all those things: our distance, our low population, and access to quality care at the time of crisis.
And who you are, like what you do.
I'm Carolyn Pepper. I'm a professor of psychology here at the University of Wyoming.
And tell me about this recent study that you did about suicide in the Mountain West.
So when I moved here in 2002, I kept hearing how Wyoming had the highest rates of suicide in the country. And the more I looked, the more I saw that it's not just Wyoming, it's the whole region. So sometimes it's called the suicide belt, from Montana and Idaho all the way down through Arizona and New Mexico. And this whole region has the highest rates of suicide in the country, plus Alaska, and has for like 100 years. And nobody was really looking into the question of why that is. So eventually I decided maybe I should start looking at that.
So there's a lot of kind of misconceptions I think people have. Like everybody wants to have an answer to this because it's hurting so many families and everything.
Right.
Can you tell me some of the kind of like maybe faux excuses that people thought were the reason?
Some things that I've heard that I think are not true are the weather.
Mm-hmm.
It's really easy to look at Wyoming weather and say, well, it must be the wind. That doesn't actually seem to be a factor. It's the cold. There are some data that really extreme temperatures, too hot or too cold, could be a factor. But really, there are a lot of great things about the Wyoming weather that work in our favor, like sunshine. Mm-hmm. We know that high rates of depression occur the further or the less sun you get. We get a lot of sun, and that's true throughout the Mountain West. Mm-hmm. So it's not likely to be as simple as the weather.
Mm-hmm. And also, like, another one that I know definitely people think about is like gun ownership around here is like really high, but I remember you saying that there's other places that people have as many access to guns and they're not killing themselves as much.
Right, so gun ownership is complicated. Mm-hmm. We know that if you introduce a firearm into the home, rates of suicide or risk for suicide goes up 2 to 3 times. So it is a factor. If there are firearms in the home, you're at more risk of suicide. But other parts of the country also have high rates of gun ownership and also have higher rates of suicide.
And that might be in like New Hampshire, South Carolina, like those.
It's actually specifically in the South.
In Texas.
So like, yeah, all the way from like South Carolina across through Texas.
Mm-hmm. So another one that I've heard a lot about Wyoming is like the isolation, transient workforce, and substance abuse. Those are the other 3 kind of major causes or whatever.
Right. So those, I think, all have a legitimate argument. If we start with substance abuse, the Mountain West region has the highest rates of substance abuse in the country, whether that's alcohol, whether that's drugs, and that could very much be a factor. Isolation. We know that there are higher rates of suicide in rural areas compared to urban areas, and it's actually a really clear kind of linear relationship. The more rural the area is, the higher the rates of suicide. And there are probably lots of reasons for that. One is one that you mentioned of the isolation, just not having contact with other people, not having access to healthcare, and specifically to mental health care. And those we think are all factors that contribute to high rates of suicide in rural areas. But even then, we have higher rates of suicide in rural areas in Wyoming than you would find in rural areas in, say, New Hampshire or upstate New York, where there are also rural areas.
So what is the situation here? Like what?
So there are there are two leading theories about why we have high rates of suicide in the Mountain West. One is the altitude. There's some evidence now that at high elevations, we just don't get quite enough oxygen, and that affects how we think sometimes, and it also affects depression rates. So that could be a factor that's been found, pretty strong correlations here in the US, but also in places like South Korea. It doesn't seem to hold up everywhere, so it's not clear that that's the sole answer. What I'm interested in is what I hear when I talk to people around Wyoming is it's this pull yourself up by the bootstraps mentality. So I've been looking at this as rugged individualism, the idea that problems are easily solved. You can solve your problems if you just try hard enough, and you don't need to complain to anybody about your emotions. You're better off if you can keep your emotions to yourself. And there are certainly things about living in the Mountain West, and especially when it was a frontier region and people were first coming out here, those kinds of ideas would have led to your survival when you're living in an isolated, harsh place. So there may be something about the idea that this area was originally settled by people who had those values, they've passed those down, and now we have a culture where you can't show your emotions, you can't ask for help. And we now have some recent data that look like, in fact, that it does distinguish this area of really high suicides in the Mountain West from the rest of the country.
So in Sweetwater County, help, you know?
It's difficult to figure out how to solve the suicide problem. Some of the things that people attempt to do, we're not sure if they work or not. So there's a lot of effort to try to destigmatize mental illness. That's probably good for a lot of things. It might help reduce suffering overall. It might help get people into treatment. We don't know if it actually reduces suicide rates.
And what does that look like to destigmatize? You know, is it kids talking about it or early education, that type of thing?
Yeah, so talking about it with kids in early education, it could be television commercials or radio commercials where people actually talk about being depressed or having a drug addiction. It's people in the community who are leaders standing up and saying that I have suffered from depression and here's how I got help and here's what it did to my family.
So Bernadine, she was on the state legislature for 1,000 years or something, and she said that she's been constantly fighting for funding for her area, and one of the problems she's had was that cowboy up mentality pervaded even into politics, so that like our elected officials don't feel comfortable talking about suicide and talking about sadness and their emotions and stuff like that.
Right.
So they have a hard time like thinking about these issues. So it's like it's pervasive in the entire Wyoming culture. Like it's so crazy. Like and Wyoming is a culture they kind of isolate themselves a little bit. Like I wonder what research would show if you asked people in Wyoming like what their travel habits are. Like they don't leave. So that's another kind of thing is like they kind of stay home. They're not like super adventurous in terms of learning new things and visiting new things. So there's almost like that kind of isolation too, like not only physical but also cultural or something
Right.
like that. So they're not
Right.
like being exposed to other things.
Yeah, so you end up with kind of a limited world. And then if something goes wrong, you don't have much to fall back on.
Did you find in your research anything about if you know somebody that's committed suicide that how that affects you?
So we know from lots of research now that being exposed to suicide is itself a risk factor for suicide, and that happens on any level. So having an immediate family member or friend die by suicide increases your risk of suicide. But it even extends out to celebrity deaths, like over the summer when Kate Spade and Anthony Bourdain, two prominent celebrities, died by suicide within a couple of weeks. We know that there will be increased rates of suicide immediately following those kinds of events. Once somebody is thinking about suicide and trying to weigh which direction to go in, it doesn't take a lot to tip somebody who's kind of right on that decision point to the other direction. And if it looks like a normal thing to do, somebody else has done it, maybe somebody got a lot of attention for doing it, especially with adolescents. That can be a factor that
fulfilling what you think you should be accomplishing then.
Yeah.
You need to have purpose, hope, I guess. I mean, that's why I think
Do you have purpose and hope?
right now,
Yeah.
yeah, I have hope for sure. I mean, I'm not going to be able to change the world or anything like that.